future implementation of artificial intelligence or large language models will change lots of our working patterns. And you do hear reports that, especially for new entrants to the workplace, that it's harder for them to find work today because people are using chatbots in their place. So I think when you're trying to find the best sustainable path, you have to first be self-reflective and ask, what do I want from work?
On entry-level positions, AI may have a negative impact at the beginning if not well managed, because it can eliminate the needs of repetitive tasks that sometimes are used to make the entry-level professionals to gain experience and to develop the skills that are needed to become more senior and to join more senior positions.
Hello everybody, my name is Evelyn Donohoe. I'm the Communications Manager for the BRIGHTskills project, which is an Erasmus Plus funded project led by EIT Health. And welcome to our third podcast of this BRIGHTskills project. Today's podcast is focusing on Europe's health tech evolution, skills, innovation and policy. And I'm really delighted to have with us today Professor Tom Melvin, who is an Associate Professor of Medical Device Regulatory Science at University of Galway. And he's also Chair of the Regulatory Affairs Committee, the Biomedical Alliance in Europe. Is that correct, Tom?
That's it. Thanks, Evelyn.
That's it. And then I'm also really happy to have Andrea Biancini here with me today. And Andrea is the Head of Education Programs at 28 Digital, which is previously EIT Digital, and I believe have changed their name just this year. You've rebranded this year, is that correct?
Yes, 3 months ago, very recently, our name, but I mean, the strategy and the topics remains the same.
Okay, perfect. So today, as our listeners know, our digital health and medical technology are rapidly evolving and reshaping healthcare delivery. And of course, digital health has become foundational in reshaping healthcare systems across Europe, if not globally. At the same time as all of these innovations are occurring, we have increasingly short product life cycles of up to just 18 to 24 months. And anybody that's been monitoring social media today will see that there's a whole raft of legislation and policy documents that have been released by the European Commission. I know Tom has been monitoring that closely, so there could be some insights in this podcast from Tom's expertise today. So my first question then, Andrea, probably I'll ask you, in fact, what key trends are driving Europe's digital health tech and medtech ecosystems?
I think that in general, digital health and medcare ecosystems are becoming more and more, let's say, our production systems. They're no more into the field of experimentation, testing and piloting, but they are becoming basically the way we deliver healthcare on a day-by-day basis, and so they're becoming more mature. And this is the first for maybe trend of evolution, which is an internal evolution of maturity of these ecosystems towards more stable and production-ready systems.
And what about you, Tom? What's your thoughts on this matter?
Very similar to how Andrea explained. I think that there are excellent advancements in basic science and engineering that are leading to new technological advancements that can change the way that care will be delivered in future. Examples would be things like increasing connections between technologies so that you could monitor a patient remotely from home rather than having to keep them under observation in a hospital ward. So we see advances in science and technology leading to greater therapeutic options. When you think of these technologies and how they make that translation from basic science through to available products and ones that are then covered or reimbursed or managed by health systems, this creates a somewhat complicated field in Europe where we have a great deal of new product developers, often coming from academic centers or spin-out organizations. Depending on the product area, then there will be different means that they grow into larger companies. Some are acquired by bigger strategic companies, some will go it alone. And then they have to progress to CE marking and then progress towards reimbursement. And I think what we're learning in Europe is that, as Andrea was saying, our regulatory and reimbursement ecosystems have undergone a lot of change in Europe in recent years. And that's something that there are further changes for regulation and a lot more implementation work for health technologies. So I think that when we consider the ecosystem overall, there are lots of technological advances. And I think in Europe, in terms of our ecosystem, we have some work to do yet in terms of making those pathways clearer so that people can translate and then impact healthcare outcomes in the best way.
We just kind of mentioned there about the intertwining of pathways, I think, if I can use that term. Could you give us just a little bit more information about what you meant by that?
Yeah. So when we think of the pathway to market for a new medical technology, what we can increasingly see is combinations of technologies. You might have a coronary stent that also elutes a drug, or you might have a software-based device that uses artificial intelligence. These fall under different product-related frameworks in Europe. So we have one framework for medicines, one for in vitro diagnostics, the kind of laboratory tests and that kind of thing. We have one for medical devices and one for artificial intelligence. If you fall within the scope of a number of those legislations, you have to comply with each of them. And there are different ways that the system tries to make those pathways possible. But that can complicate your translational development. And in Europe, something that we saw in recent years around 2022 with the new medical device and in vitro diagnostic regulations, we had a significant lack of assessment capacity. So the notified bodies who approve products to get their CE mark and go to market, we didn't have enough of them essentially. That has somewhat passed now, so there is much greater assessment capacity. But just yesterday we had a proposal published for the medical device and in vitro diagnostic rules that will bring potentially quite significant changes. So that's just a proposal from the European Commission. It then has to go on to the European Council and Parliament and then a trialogue to finalise it. So that there is a movement in Europe to seek to simplify these various regulatory rules. And for novel technologies, things like artificial intelligence, these can struggle under the traditional, what we call new approach frameworks for CE marking. So we have a movement and a much bigger policy push to do things like establish regulatory sandboxes. So different means of evaluating these novel technologies where complying with standards and regulatory guidance it doesn't completely fit the innovative nature of the technology.
Okay, that's really interesting, and it sounds incredibly complex. That would require quite a specialist skill set, in fact, with knowledge across a lot of systems all at once, which leads me very nicely into the next question that we have here. Where do companies face the greatest regulatory or compliance bottlenecks, and what skills are becoming essential to navigate these challenges, Tom?
Yeah, well, when we think of any technology that's used in health and you want to translate that from the basic science through to a marketed product, there are 4 key strategies that you need to have. You have to have a clear business strategy, a technology strategy, a clinical strategy, and a regulatory strategy. Without these 4 strategies, you won't translate and produce a marketed product. So when we think of how skills are needed to support these kinds of activities and ecosystems, it's very much domain or clinical area dependent. So in fields like software, these are often characterized by very small organizations, might be 5 people, and they have to figure out how to prepare all of those 4 strategies. And that means that you have to work in an environment that's very dynamic and changing, where you might be working on writing procedures for a quality system one day, helping with a protocol for a study the next day, figuring out data access and GDPR the next day. So there are, in fields like that, in small organizations, you'll be doing lots of different work to help that startup to progress. And one of the things that I find these organizations have to figure out is how much of this can we do internally, and then when do we need to go for external support? So getting that skills mix correct, where no group of 5 people will be an expert in all of the challenges they'll face, but you do have to have a certain degree of learning in order to figure out, now we need to bring in some consultancy expertise or to get help from some other organization. So I guess figuring out these best skill mix are what's important. And for people coming into this sector and thinking of career opportunities, I guess it's often driven by your interest and the kind of dynamic you'd like to work in. So, if you're in, let's say, a cardiovascular field, these are somewhat larger organizations, and when they have new companies, they're often bought by the very big organizations later in their development. So I guess that it's very different within the ecosystem, the kind of working life that you could expect. Yeah.
I think is one of the biggest challenges and difficulties that we need to consider also when we look at skills that are becoming more and more essential in this area, which is the fact that regulation and innovation are growing in density and are overlapping. So this was already said and introduced by Tom. He mentioned the IVDR, and he mentioned how raising the bar on clinical evidence here intersects with, I don't know, AI regulation, the AI Act, and similar other regulations. Why this is happening? This is happening before the different regulations, of course, have different perspectives, but in the end, they intertwine and they are all applicable to the same problem and to the same action that we have to do. So one skill which is particularly relevant to me is, of course, being let's say, knowledgeable of regulatory and innovation trends and things happening, but being able to apply them, being able to understand how they have an effect on what you're doing and what you can do differently or you have to do differently to make everything compliant to the regulations or taking the most possible advantage of the innovation opportunities. I also think that in Europe, we are very well positioned because we have one of the more advanced regulations on how to deal with data, which is, of course, the GDPR and everything that comes after that. And sometimes we, let's say, stop to consider, or we need to stop considering GDPR only as a tool to limit the use of data, but actually is a tool that can enhance the use of data.
Kind of linked to that, what your point that I picked up that was also really interesting was this need maybe for more generic skill sets, not just specific specialist knowledge about a specific topic. And possibly quite linked to that point is what key competencies are then most in demand in the medtech and health technology sectors today, Andrea?
Very challenging and very difficult, but this can happen, and that's the reason why I like this question, when you connect skills with applications of these skills, so skills with competencies and expression of these competencies in your activities and your actions.
Tom, I'm going to address the same question to you, but I might tweak it slightly in that, especially in the BRIGHTskills project, we're also seeing this emphasis on the need for regulatory skills. But I think what we're seeing in practice is while we need those skills, we don't see a lot of people are attracted to studying them. What is behind that, do you think, and what could be done to improve this? Because, okay, we could have somebody going into cardiovascular and AI, but maybe they just think, oh, regulation, that's a lawyer's thing. I'm not even going to touch it.
10 years ago, most people who work in quality or regulatory affairs in medtech or what would have been digital health then, they often didn't start off with that as their professional goal or background. So it would be people with science or engineering backgrounds who started working for one of these medtech organizations and ended up working in quality and regulation. What we see today is a growth of more specialized training for these kind of activities, because it is quite essential. It's kind of 2 of the 4 essential strategies you need. Your clinical and your regulatory have to be aligned, and it even affects your business strategy, because if you don't have a clear regulatory pathway to market, so the changes to the medical device and IVD rules seek to reduce the cost to the sector by 3 billion annually. Which is a huge amount. So it's something where I'd suspect that notified bodies or those assessment bodies may shrink a little. So there'll be people who'll have to repurpose their careers, because some of the assessment organizations will shrink if this proposal proceeds. But I think still it's an area where there is lots of job opportunities, in the broader medtech ecosystem to help with compliance, because every company's regulation and quality department has been growing over the recent years.
What is your opinion on this as well, as well as on top of the other question about how can we position ourselves to get into these fast moving sectors? You know, I've heard that we need to be curious and we need to be open to continuous learning. Is there anything else that we should be keeping in mind?
Careers that are no more probably linear progressions. They're not developing through linear path, but they are becoming much more portfolio based and also including sometimes big switches or big changes. This can happen when, well, basically we focus on the skills that we develop and the abilities and the capabilities that we develop and how we can make them helpful in the new context of job where we go to. Of course, it's not just randomly going around careers, but it's growing them with a midterm perspective with layered competencies, maybe coming from even from different backgrounds.
I think that when people are starting out and thinking of their future career paths, they'll often come to the market or the employment marketplace with their hard skills. You're an engineer, you're a scientist, you're whatever. And you know, as Andrea and you were saying, Evelyn, the future implementation of artificial intelligence or large language models will change lots of our working patterns. And you do hear reports that, especially for new entrants to the workplace, that it's harder for them to find work today because people are using chatbots in their place. So I think when you're trying to find the best sustainable path, you have to first be self-reflective and ask, what do I want from work? Do I want to be doing something that I am really interested in, or am I more interested in work-life balance, or those kind of personal things? You have to go for a long walk essentially and see what do I want from my working life, and that's different for everyone, I find. But to make things sustainable, I think, as Andrea said, acknowledging that in a rapidly changing ecosystem, you will have to keep up skills, and that can be done in a variety of ways. Once you finish your undergraduate years, you could do postgraduate learning in a more formal setting. There's lots of professional courses that will be a shorter 6-week, 10-week, 3-month kind of thing that will help you with specific skills. And I guess, how do you learn how to map out the best ones of those that you should target?
We have this paradox happening where we have the younger workers who, and the statistics are showing that it's more difficult to get them into entry-level jobs. And then at the same time, we have this other end of the spectrum too, where we're saying we don't have enough workers. So what do we do? So probably just focusing on those kind of mega trends, what advice would you give to professionals or organizations navigating these rapidly evolving sectors, giving these contexts?
On entry-level positions, AI may have a negative impact at the beginning if not well managed, because it can eliminate the needs of repetitive tasks that sometimes are used to make the entry-level professionals to gain experience and to develop the skills that are needed to become more senior and to join more senior positions. So in this sense, and I attach the suggestion for organization, I really suggest organizations, for how complex it can be, to think about skills and knowledge as a strategic asset and not just as a cost.
I think for the individuals, I think it's important to stay curious and engage with your professional network, regardless of where you are, especially in health tech and digital health. You know, there is a huge amount of learning that you will get from working with your peers. When thinking of organizations, how do they adapt to this kind of rapidly changing dynamic? Many of them will be undergoing some form of digital transformation. It might be, even if you're a traditional medtech company making whatever, catheters or something, you'll probably be thinking about digitalizing your quality management system or your purchasing control or things like that. So getting that balance right, as to, you know, implementing these digital solutions to help with your organizational approach, whilst bringing the teams along with you. I guess that's one of the challenges for organizations. How do we as a company or an organization utilize these technological advancements whilst doing the really difficult work of implementation? You know, sometimes you've probably seen the joke that, you know, Geoffrey Hinton said we wouldn't need radiologists in 2016, and we'd all be going to work in electric cars, and you look at the highway and it's full of radiologists going to work in their ordinary cars. And we have more radiologists than ever now. So the technological promise is there, but the timeline to when it becomes implemented, we do not know for sure yet. And figuring out your strategy and that kind of dynamic is what will be really important to organizational success. So I guess that's the challenge for organizations and for the individuals. Stay curious and keep learning.
Thank you very much. There's some really interesting takeaway message here. So for all of our listeners, take it that your career path, it shouldn't be linear. Be curious, be excited about the new changes, even though it seems like the messages coming from media and big tech is as dystopian. In reality, it's not. We're not there yet, and we probably will never be there, which is also a very good thing. And then for companies to think about skills and knowledge as a strategic asset, and to keep engaging with your networks and reach out as much as possible and embrace lifelong learning.
Very good summary.
Great. So thank you very much, Andrea and Tom. It's been excellent having you with us today, and you never know, maybe we'll invite you back for another podcast in the future.
Thanks, it's been a pleasure.